Really, what's he cooking you for breakfast?
Well, waffles this morning, but he's got a specialty of, he makes a biscuit and an egg and ham and jalapeno peppers.
Okay. And you like the hot stuff.
I do, I like them.
Okay, and so the trick to this is you're just going to look at me and try to ignore the camera.
Ignore the camera.
It should all be set up, I think.
All right.
And so start by telling me the year and the date you were born, because I know you were a big baby.
I was a big baby. It came across at midnight, or almost midnight, on the 11th of April in 1923, when I was weighed in at 11 pounds.
11 pounds.
11 pounds. And most of my friends saying you've hardly grown since.
And it's no wonder your mom didn't have any more after an 11-pound baby, right?
She didn't.
So you were an only child. Do you remember some early childhood memories?
Oh yes, I remember neighbors. I remember that there was a beer salesman lived next door south, delivering Anheuser-Busch. And in those days, they came in wooden crates. And he would lift this wooden crate on his shoulder and carry these beer cases in the bars and restaurants and places like that. I was also amazed at another father of a good friend of mine who recently passed away. He was an FBI man, but his father worked for a lumber company. And in those days, they were carrying 100-pound bags of Portland cement, and I just cannot imagine how that man could have carried those. And he passed away early, by the way, and they both did. Neither one lived to a very elderly age.
So what did your parents do?
My father started the company known as Auto, Tire, and Parts. And strangely enough, they never sold tires. Even to this day, they are going by that name, and they have joined an NAPA association, the National Association of Automobile Dealers, automobile parts dealers, and that's for buying power, to help contrast to the many national level stores. We have 4 national level stores in our town for competition, and yet my father didn't want me to come into the company because he thought they would soon unionize, and that might not be favorable. At that time, all the employees were very helpful, and they never did unionize, and now they have about 49 stores, and they still buck these chain stores that are in town.
So did you know at an early age you wanted to be a dentist?
Oh, it didn't matter, dentistry or medicine. I liked the medical field, but the dental field has one advantage that the medicine field doesn't, and there are more mechanics involved, except for the surgeons, perhaps. But except for the orthopedic surgeons, dentistry doesn't compare with any other medical field in having the situation, like they said at the Gem Fair last week. Your castings may be similar to our castings, but yours have to fit, and that's true. Whereas in jewelry, it doesn't have the precise meaning.
So you kind of liked working with your hands and,
I do.
Doing all the mechanics and things, that aspect.
They're pretty strange. Because at age 19, I had rheumatoid arthritis
19?
in the Philippines. And so it resulted in a lot of loss of cartilage. I probably don't have any cartilage. And the problem has arisen. I do exercises regularly. I'm up to 60 in my count now. And under my right knee, that's called the popliteal fossa. Under my right knee, I have a popliteal cyst, which is simply a bit of tissue that takes the expansive lubricant from the knee joint that escapes now because there's no cartilage to hold it in. Fortunately, it can easily be drained and then filled with cortisone and I'm as good as new. It doesn't happen very often.
Wow, that's an early age to have that rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
So you graduated high school, and then what did you do immediately following high school?
I was in service.
And so
Yes,
tell me
yes.
about that. What branch of service and where'd you go?
Well, it was the Army. I was already accepted in dental school in 1941 when I was being graduated from public schools, high school. And so it was only natural that the Army and the Navy would have programs that would accommodate those people already accepted. And so I roomed with a medical student at St. Louis University. I was in dental school, he was in medical school. And we had regular mass military get-togethers, and we even marched down city streets in St. Louis. We had to march to a campus that had room for our drill practice.
Mm-hmm.
I never will forget in crossing the suspension bridge over the railroad tracks in St. Louis that we had to break step because it's dangerous for marching bodies to cross the suspension bridge because of the associated rhythm of each step, you know.
So when did you find out you'd be deploying to the Philippines?
Oh, it took a year at Fort Lewis, Washington. I didn't have very nice quarters, but I had a nice job. I scrubbed the latrine. I also had the secondary job of being mail clerk. I had the tertiary job of being a day room manager, which meant that as World War II and the European program and the Pacific program each had separate boards. And I read the daily paper, and as information about the two fronts came on, I would post them on the horizontal or almost horizontal board, and then have ribbon going up to the location on the world map where they were taking place. And apparently I did a good job. I really did work hard at keeping that darn latrines. We didn't have running water in the barracks buildings. It was called Camp Murray. And even though they had nice 3 or 4 story barracks buildings at Fort Lewis, Washington, I was confined to this Camp Murray, and where I did the mail service and the day room clerk and the latrine orderly. And apparently I did a good job, because when my friends were leaving to go to the Pacific and I wasn't, I couldn't imagine why, and I finally went to headquarters and they showed me the file, and because I was doing a good job, they liked me, and I stayed there until I insisted on leaving.
So they just kept you there because they
kept me
liked
there.
your work.
But just for a year,
Okay.
because it was embarrassing for all my friends to be out of the country and I hadn't been out yet.
So you're going, what's going on? Why haven't I been sent somewhere? And then, so finally you get orders that you're going to the Philippines, and this is part of World War II.
Yes,
Okay.
it was at VJ Day. The war was just ending. Pacific War was just ending. We still had blackouts on, at nighttime on the ship. They were very careful. And we got to the Philippines and we stopped off. And we went out on continuing our way, and we got to Midway Island, and they say that someone had inadvertently put salt water into the boilers, causing them to foam up and being a disagreeable situation for the mechanics of the ship. It was a Liberty ship. And so we came back to Oahu, and at Honolulu, our ship was docked under the Aloha Tower, and the chaplain would bring the pump organ with his helper up to the top deck, and I got to play church services right under the Aloha Tower.
On the deck of the ship?
On the deck of the ship, top deck.
How about that? What was the response to that?
Well, it was a lot better than being inside. I enjoyed it. We weren't there but a couple of days, and then we left again. And Then we passed Eniwetok before its a usage internationally, and then we went on to Luzon, got off at Manila Harbor, and in the midst of the night took a train where we rode in cattle cars to Angeles, where the replacement depot was located up near Clark Field. And it was a bad ride, of course, by train, and it didn't go all the way. And so we would get out and have to carry our duffel bags. And I was awful seasick on the trip, I should admit, because that was the beginning of the problem with rheumatoid, because its problem was probably due to malnutrition.
Oh, interesting. Because you weren't eating probably very wholesome meals on the ship ride. How long were you on the ship?
I don't know, because it was in and out a couple times at Honolulu.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how long it took.
And at this point, when you're on the ship, what was the name of the ship? Do you remember?
No, I can't remember. All I just remember it was a Victory ship. They were all the same size, same weights. They weren't really big, so the chances of seasickness was far greater.
Oh, I can't imagine. I would have been miserable as well. So at this point, as you're sailing over there, has the war been declared over?
Yes, but we still had Japanese in the mountains around Angeles, that's north of Manila, where the Japanese probably didn't realize the war was over, and we still had to have guard duty and be on the lookout for those that came out. Occasionally they would come out firing and trying to get food, I guess, because they were pretty much alone at that time.
So you make it over to the Philippines. Now, at this point, had you met Polly?
Oh, no, I didn't know her.
Okay, so how long were you in the Philippines?
Probably about a year, and then I came home on a hospital ship.
And why did you come home?
Oh, I couldn't walk. But I want to tell you that we had a little band on the ship, and I really enjoyed playing my horn, trombone. And I could be really seasick on the hospital ship, but if we started playing, I would forget all about it. And that's typical. If you can be occupied, you can get over your seasickness. But it's hard to be playing in a band all the time. But I really enjoyed it.
But if you could play in a band all the time, I think you just might.
I could have enjoyed it. I noticed the other day I had some indigestion, but as soon as Denise, my daughter, your mother, started playing, then I would forget about it. So I think music is a good treatment, as well as therapy is a good treatment.
I think so. How old were you when you started playing trombone?
Oh, I had just finished the first 4 grades, grade 10. I was 11 at the time.
11 years old. And had you already been playing piano?
Oh, yes, I'd been playing piano ever since I was in 4th grade, which would have been the year before.
Was that at your parents' insistence, or did you want to play the piano?
Oh, I enjoyed it. Because my father played saxophone, and he had 2 C melody saxophones, and that means they were keyed so they could be read off of piano music, or C music, as musicians would call it. And my mother and father had played together, and then she let me take her place and play with my father. And I never will forget the first day that my father bought that trombone from a local musician's at his store. He had been a river musician and had settled down to work for a store now as a musician. He was a sax man, and his countenance is on our seawall, we call it. It's not a seawall, it's a river wall, Mississippi River Wall at Cape Girardeau, playing his saxophone. And he says, I'm going to teach that boy to play America the first day. And so we played America with no air conditioning, with the windows open. And if you've ever heard a brass player start the first year, and you have, that it's a horrible sound.
Oh boy. And so it began. Okay, so what about you're in the Philippines, you spend a year, you get back on a hospital ship because the rheumatoid arthritis is excruciating. Do you get home to the United States and get some treatment for that?
We came to the Golden Gate Bridge, and we had disembarked at a hospital right there at the south end of the Golden Gate Bridge, which has since been rebuilt. And then we went, after a few days, not long, there, because I couldn't go anyplace. Got on a hospital train and went to Fort Bliss. Now I know that this was 1946 because the U.S. NASA space program was just starting, and Werner von Braun had come over from Germany. It was going to be the leader of it. And so they were going to put it at Fort Bliss, San Antonio, Texas, until Fort Bliss decided that they were much too small for the program that NASA had anticipated. And so then they offered to buy property in northern Alabama, and instead of Fort Bliss, the National Space Agency went to Huntsville, Alabama, which fortunately I had a chance to visit. It's an amazing location.
Do you remember hearing about that? Like space travel? And did that just blow your mind at the time?
I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, amazing.
Couldn't believe it.
Now, is this about the same time as we're going through like the Great Depression, right?
Well, no, it was past, of course it was past the Depression of the 30s.
Okay.
Because
right.
this was in 1940, this was 1946.
Do you remember those Depression years, though, and what that was like living during that time?
It wasn't too hard on us because my father had started his company, Auto Tire and Parts, and I haven't told you how it came about. He had worked as the wood firing steam engine for a thrashing machine in the summertime that was owned by his older brother, who was so much older that it was almost like a father to him. So he actually had two fathers living at the time, his very oldest brother and that one. And in the wintertime, they couldn't do wheat thrashing, and so they did sawmilling. And so he was pretty tired of firing that thrashing machine, the steam engine, all year long. He also had another undesirable job. They raised pigs and cattle and turkeys and probably sheep. I don't know about goats. And my father's duty was to drive them several miles on a country road to get to the river at Wittenberg, Missouri, upstream from Cape Girardeau, close, not far from Chester, Illinois. And at this point, he would get on the boat on the lower level with the animals and live with them while they made the 2-day trip to St. Louis. And then he would drive them off the boat and they would go to market. And he was pretty tired of these two jobs. And so he decided if he bought an automobile, and the Ford Model T was the automobile in 1909. So we did not have a Ford dealer in Cape Girardeau. They didn't come until 1914. But at this time, Henry Ford was doing a few trucks and he was doing a few passenger cars, and my father bought a passenger car, of which we have some pictures of my mother, his girlfriend, and some of his friends riding in this passenger car. But at the same time, in 1909, President Taft had come into office. Now, President Taft had a goal. He wanted to establish a 10-foot channel for the Mississippi River from St. Louis to New Orleans. And this was an admirable goal. And to do so, he had to have the help of Congress, of course, and establish the Army engineers for the river for dredging, because the river really was quite shallow in many places. And it still requires dredging to this day in many locations on the Mississippi. And that is at least the southern, or the midsection between St. Louis and Cairo, Illinois. And so he ordered his Model T, and it just so happened that President Taft had gathered together an armada of 15 steamboats, and my father's car was on one of these boats. And when he got to Cape Girardeau, they unloaded my father's car, after which he drove southern Illinois, probably northern Arkansas, and southeast Missouri, taking orders for automobile parts. Of course, there were not many cars. Henry Ford had made the announcement, you can have any color in a Model T you want, just so it's black. And so that's the way it was the first few years. And Henry Ford had just started to modernize his assembly line over the other cars, and so it was a great success. And so that was the story of how Auto Tire and Parts started, and is still going to this day. It's 117 years old, and the oldest company in our town, Cape Girardeau, Missouri, on the Mississippi River in southeast Missouri.
That's an incredible story. Hold on a second. I'm going to pause this here.